Patchwork and quilting is all about the fun and enjoyment and creativity, time out for yourself, continuing those heritage crafts from the generations before us. It is amazing, an amazing hobby even. However, there are some mistakes that beginner quilters make, and I would love for you to avoid them. So who am I? I am Kim. This is Quilt with Kim. This is a channel dedicated to beginner quilters. You are very welcome. So I am covering the top 5 mistakes. I've saved the best to last, so stick around to that one, but let's get going with the very first mistake that you can avoid. So our first mistake to avoid is making mistakes, and that's what the seam rippers were invented for. Our humble, trusty seam ripper will get us out of many a tangle and a missed seam and all the rest of it. So that's what these were invented for, and their best friend, the glasses, so we can see what we're unpicking. However, if you're starting out and you're beginning, don't worry about them. Don't sweat the mistakes. We learn from our mistakes. So you want to be making them so that you get better and better and better, which you will. So just live the mistakes. It makes it unique. Whatever you've made will be the only one like it in the entire world, particularly if you've scattered some mistakes in there. So don't worry about the mistakes. And if you really don't like them, get your seam ripper and get your glasses out, and they'll be gone in no time. So the next mistake that I see beginners make is not loving their iron. Now, I know I hate ironing too under normal circumstances, but learn to love ironing your fabric, because if you iron your fabric before you measure and then cut it, it will make that whole process so much more accurate. And if you iron the back of your seams and get them all going the same way, that'll mean your seams nest so much easier. Your whole piece will end up looking so much more not precise, but looking professionally finished and nicely finished if you iron all the way through. So learn to love your iron. It is an integral part of the whole stitching process, whether you're doing patchwork and quilting or bag making or dressmaking or whatever. Ironing is part of that process. So love that iron of yours. And whilst we're on the subject of using your iron to help with accuracy, we do of course need to look at our ruler and rotary cutter, because this is the next mistake that I see beginners make, is not using their ruler and their rotary cutter to best effect to get the most accurate measurements. It makes such a difference over a whole quilt. If you're out slightly on your measurements, it'll push everything else out. So really learn how to use both your ruler and your rotary cutter down to the last 1/8 of an inch of a measurement, and your project will thank you for it. I promise this is worth spending time on. Walk into any quilt shop and you will be besieged by loads of very pretty threads on some very big thread stands, and they all look like just like they're leaping out, that you want to buy them, and you want to buy them now. But don't get carried away, because this is the next biggest mistake that I see beginners make. They fill up with all the wrong types of thread, and I don't want you to waste your money filling up your thread stash with thread that you will never use. So I have got a whole playlist, which I'll link to at the end, which tells you all about different aspects of thread. So go and check that out. But as a quick recap, if you see threads that look pretty much like this, and they will have 30 on the bottom. So let me just find that. And of course it's twizzled round. So it would say 30 at the bottom of the spool. That is too thick for you to do your patchwork. Okay, so when we do patchwork, that's called piecing. That's where we cut up our fabric and we sew it together. That's called piecing. We need a 50 weight thread for that. So these generally are on spools that look like this. This one's from Gutermann. You can also choose Mettler or a few other brands besides. So you want that 50 weight thread to do your piecing, your patchwork bit. And you want the thicker threads for doing the quilting. That's the decorative bit on the top. What I don't want you to ever choose, not when you're starting out anyway, is quilting thread. I know this is confusing, isn't it? So you'll get, or you'll see stands with this. It's got this light beige spool and it's got quilting along the bottom there. Can you see just there? Even though it says quilting, it's for hand quilting. It's not to go in your machine, but it is still for hand quilting for the decorative part of your quilt, not for the piecing together. So if you're a complete beginner, get your 50 weight spool of thread. It will say it on the stand. It will say it on the spool. When you are quilting, so you're decorating your quilt, you're sewing your 3 layers together, then you need a 30 or 40 weight thread and it will look something like that. So get the right thread at the right point of your project and avoid the horrible mistakes that some of the beginners make. I know that you can do it. So let's move on to the final and probably the biggest mistake that I see beginners make. So let's go and check that out. And the last mistake that I want you to avoid as a beginner quilter is, to start with, making a quilt. What on earth am I talking about? The reason why is because when you're making a huge quilt top, and yeah, this hasn't been quilted yet, it's on my to-do pile, my UFO pile. As a quilter, you will get one of those too. But the reason why I say to not start with one of these, a big quilt, is because there are so many steps of skills that you have to learn, from measuring accurately to cutting accurately to being able to stitch a consistent 1/4 inch seam, to being able to match your seams. And I know I said at the start of this video that that's not so important when you're starting out, and it isn't. But when you're making the big quilts, the pattern works with the fabrics sitting nicely together and the seams matching. Otherwise you can get jagged edges and it ruins the design. So you really want to button down those skills by the time you get to a big quilt like this. Also there's the layering of the quilt, and layering it without, I can't say that word today, layering your quilt without having wrinkles on the back, and that's a skill set to learn too. So with all of my students, whether they're in-person students or my online students, I start everybody off really small with a cushion, and there's a reason I do that, because you can start learning those skills step by very easy step, and as you progress through one stage at a time, you can build confidence and hone in on your previous skills and add new ones, and then before you know it, you can then get to making a whole quilt and you'll have the confidence to tackle that. The other thing is, if you're starting straight out with a whole quilt, and as I said, all these skills that you've got to learn, fabric isn't really cheap over an entirety of the quilt. And okay, when we're quilters, we love spending money on fabric and buying the fabric and cutting it all up and all the rest of it. But if you haven't got those skills yet, it can be really frustrating. And then you'll just ditch the quilt because you're throwing it out and you think, I can't do this anymore. I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm making all these mistakes. And that's quite an expensive mistake to make, both in time and in money. And I don't want you to do that. I want you to enjoy this hobby and love the process. So just enjoy the step-by-step process as you're going through, making each step of your patchwork and quilting journey, from starting small and then build up to those big quilts, and you'll be able to make them in no time at all, I promise you. I hope that has helped you today to just avoid the top 5. That's not 5, it's the top 5 most common mistakes that I see the beginner quilters make, and I would love for you to enjoy your hobby. So try and avoid these, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.